Welcome to the Futurist Society podcast, where we delve into the latest advancements in technology, science, and culture. From discussions on the latest breakthroughs in AI, biotechnology, and space exploration, the Futurist Society is your window into all of the awesomeness that the future holds. Get ready to be informed and inspired as we consider the positive impact of emerging technologies on humanity. Without further ado, welcome your host, Dr. Awesome.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Futurist Society, where we are talking about the future, but talking in the present with Cassie Solomon, who is a professor at Wharton Business School, as well as a executive and president at New Group Consulting, which is a consulting firm that focuses on a number of different things. But what I'm most interested in talking with Cassie about is just the future of work. Right now, especially in the news, a lot of different people are talking about what is work going to look like in the future? So Cassie, tell us a little bit about what you're doing and some insights that you might have.
Thanks, Dr. Austin. Nice to meet you. Great to be here. Really appreciate the chance to talk to you. I started my career as an organizational change expert, and that's really my kind of sort of family of origin study. And also looking at it from a systems perspective, wrote a book with a Wharton colleague named Greg Shea called Leading Successful Change. But I always thought that it should be titled Designing Successful Change, because it really is a systems change model. And somewhere in about 2016, I just became really fascinated by all of this disruptive technology that's coming at us, and the idea that it was going to be transformative and change our systems and pretty much everything about our society. And I started studying it pretty seriously with a couple of my clients and ended up going off to the Institute for the Future in Palo Alto to study how to be a futurist, which is kind of an unknown phrase. A lot of people, it stops traffic dead at cocktail parties when you tell people you're a futurist, and they always want to know what stocks they should buy. But futurists don't actually predict the future. They help people think about the future in more sophisticated ways and more imaginative ways, so that they're ready when it comes. And that's really changed my practice actually quite a lot, from all organizational change more to strategy work. So a number of my clients have said, wait a minute, come talk to us about the future and help us figure out what we should be doing for the next 5 years.
So I just want to double click on that for just a second. So when you're telling people to think about the future, can you give me just an example that a layperson would understand about how you come in and guide people to predict that?
Absolutely. I actually really loved what you said, Dr. Imran, about talking about the future, but doing it in the present. There's a very famous quote from a science fiction writer that you probably know named William Gibson. And he says, the future is already here. It just isn't evenly distributed. So futurists talk about looking for signals, things that are not fiction, things that are actually happening today, but they're on the fringe. That's Amy Webb's term. They're not in the mainstream yet. And one of the things we try to encourage our clients to do is to start actively looking for signals in the environment for things that are going to affect their business and the way that their business is going to change. And that could be any kind of business, from media entertainment to healthcare to banking. So looking at the signals all around us is part of what we practice.
So just give me an example of that from a healthcare perspective. Like if you come into an organization and someone says, hey, we want to think about what's coming in the future and be prepared for that, what would be something that you would be incorporating into that organization?
So this is a signal that I love, and it's now 5 years old, but it's still pretty much not in the mainstream. There's a diagnostic device called IDXDR, which is the first FDA authorized device that could do a diagnosis all by itself. The diagnosis is in the machine instead of being in the healthcare provider. And what it diagnoses is diabetic retinopathy, which is the disease that makes diabetics go blind. Mm-hmm. And this kind of ties to one of my passions, which is the way that these changes are going to improve access. So this is a device that, you put your head into it. It takes a picture of your retina. It compares that picture to its library of machine learning images, and it can render the diagnosis on the spot. Do you have diabetic retinopathy or not? About 50% of the diabetics in this country don't get screened for this as they are supposed to do annually, because right now the only way you can get screened for it is in an ophthalmologist's office. So with this device, everybody can get screened in their primary care office or even in a grocery store. They put them in grocery stores in Delaware, and it can be operated by a high school tech. And this is not going to put ophthalmologists out of business. 100% no, because if you screen 50% more of the population, many of those people are going to be positive and they're going to need to go to the ophthalmologist to have their retinopathy taken care of. But it's an example of how the combination of AI and machine learning is beginning to put more and more of the human judgment that we think of as like only resident right now in humans into the machine, and can do that more broadly for more people. That's the positive news about it.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that signal of diagnosis being leveraged with AI and actually making it easier for clinicians to focus on the more procedural aspects or the more empathetic aspects of healthcare, I think that that's coming down the pipeline. I totally agree with that. So let's say, some big hospital system says, hey, come in, we see this signal happening. Like, how would you prepare us for that? What would you say to them? What would you set up for them?
We have a method, and part of it is, do you have like a disciplined search function? How are you learning about what's going on around you? I was on the phone yesterday, no, because that was Friday, with someone who's really concerned about their health system because they're building a new patient tower, and she thinks that they're building it to be state of the art 2023. But by the time it opens in 5 years, it's going to be dated from the minute the ribbon is cut. So how do you build, they're going to put tens of millions of dollars into this building. How do you anticipate the functionality that you want to have in it today? And I said, I said, just call vendors and have vendors come in and present to you. And I gave her a couple of examples. It's free. They'll all come and talk to your healthcare system. They'd love to. But you need a function inside the company that is looking around and collecting these signals. That's one thing. We do a lot of work in scenarios. So just staying on the healthcare side for a moment, a number of years ago when we started developing this method, we said, let's do a perioperative patient journey. What will that look like in 10 years from the moment of the first symptom to the post-op rehab? And how might it be different with all this new technology that we're learning about? And we did another scenario that was a day in the life of a provider. How would their journey be different in the way that they cared for patients? And we often go out 10 years because it sort of liberates people and they're more imaginative and more creative, and they're less kind of stuck in, oh my God, we could never imagine that, that's crazy talk. But 10 years is usually going to arrive within the next 4 to 5 years, given the disruptive pace of change that we're seeing. And then the next piece is just considering the implications. So if we had devices like that could take care of all of the rote screening, and ophthalmologists could just do real top of license work, that they're uniquely suited for, how would that change the whole healthcare system? If that principle, and I think it will kind of travel throughout the whole principle. Looking at privileges for CRNAs, for example, in ORs, that's an ongoing debate. But if you look at the kinds of devices that they're developing for surgery and the titrating of the anesthesia, the anesthesiologist will probably be supervising 10 rooms in the future instead of 2 rooms or 5 rooms.
Yeah, no, I hope so. I think that just from a ground level perspective, the usage of operating rooms is very difficult to obtain as a surgeon. There's just not enough operating rooms for the amount of procedures that need to be done, and then B, the amount of surgeons that are in a hospital system. So I look forward to the day where we become more efficient. I think that we haven't leveraged a lot of the existing technology enough, but I want to know just from a broad perspective, like, you know, where do you see the future of work going, right? Like the idea of, me going in to the OR and doing these surgeries. I think in, Star Trek, like that could be done through on another planet. I could be operating through robots, like that's obviously like a pie in the sky type of scenario, right? Like, but I think that coming more down to earth, me operating from a robot in another room is not very different. It's not very different than that. Like that's available right now.
Right.
So we have all these quote unquote signals, like you said. I'd love to know just what do you think that not only a surgeon's life is going to be like, but just like a entry level employee, like are we still going to have to show up to work? Are we still going to be, from home? Like what is it going to look like?
Well, I think we have to step back and consider the effect of COVID for a moment. I did a scenario with a bunch of banking regulators, and they said, okay, go out 10 years. We're not going to have to go into the banks to examine them. We're going to do all of it remotely. And this was 6 months before COVID hit. And if I had $1 for every one of them that called me and said, wait a minute, Cassie, we did that 10-year scenario in August, and now it's March of 2022. And we're all examining remotely. So I think geography is becoming less relevant. And we saw a huge increase in telemedicine and telework, all of the remote work things that surged during COVID, kind of in this fight to the death with hybrid work right now. How much can I really do from home? But I'm in Philadelphia, you're in Boston, here we are. We talked before we got on about the Mark Zuckerberg interview on the Lex Friedman podcast. They're doing the technology so that we don't even have to be on our Zoom camera together. We can be together across time and space as our avatars, and they look just like us, and they sound just like us. So I think the trend is pretty permanently established that it's going to be optional to be in person, and we're going to have to think carefully about what do we do that's better in person versus what we can accomplish remotely. I think there will be some things that will still be better, but I don't think surgery is one of them, Dr. Austin. So think about, you said it, the Da Vinci robot means that you're no longer standing at the patient's, you're not at the bedside. Yeah. And I think the Army this is another signal. The Army is already doing remote surgeries across, country lines because you can. And the implications again for access, or what about all of the places where they don't have enough surgeons? How do we take care of those people? We don't suddenly manufacture 5 million more surgeons and drop them into sub-Saharan Africa. We use this remote capability and work with the people who are on the ground, and the surgeon is sitting back at the robot in Germany.
Yeah, no, I wonder how long it's going to trickle down, because I feel like that is something where right now the quality of being in person is still higher than a telepresence. But, I think that me being a surgeon and me being beholden to a hospital is like not a big deal. It concerns me that I just can't pick up and like move to Bali if I wanted to. But the fact is I kind of like being in one location. But most people don't, right? And most people, if given the option, would work from home, but it's still kind of a luxury. It's still kind of a white collar only type of situation, and I know that Elon Musk recently had a conversation where he made a moral argument for it, where it was that, how can we ask these people who are making the cars to come in, whereas like the executives are staying from home? So that's why he mandated it at Tesla. How do you feel about that?
I think there's an awful lot of double standard going on in the world, and it explains some of the kind of angriness and resentment of people. There's a really good book I want to recommend called The Future of Work by an economist named Daniel Susskind. And his thesis, I think, is really worth thinking about, which is at the lower end where the work is manual, a lot of those jobs are going to remain, we've got Amazon warehouse robots taking over some of that literally heavy lifting, but still if it's fine motor skill, especially surgery, and it's manual, that job is going to be preserved. And then the very highest level jobs are going to be preserved, and it's going to hollow out the middle. And I think we saw that during COVID with first responders and people who were, considered the heroes, the people that kept the grocery stores full of food, or those of us who wanted to remote shop.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to take longer to replace the manual tasks, but the blending of robotics plus AI, which is starting to happen, is pretty profound. We have our Roombas that, kind of sense where the table furniture is, but that's the least of it. And I think the greatest examples of it are probably in manufacturing. And we've lost a lot of manufacturing jobs as a result of that kind of automation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I tell people this all the time. The one thing that I'm really looking forward to is the human type of robots that are able to clean our rooms and, do our laundry and do all of like the menial tasks, the admin tasks of being a human in 2023, being an adult human in 2023. Just have the robot do it. I can't wait until that day happens, and personally, I think that's going to be a great day. I think it's going to allow us to have more free time, allow us to have more meaningful relationships because all of the admin work will be taken over by robots. So I think from if we zoom out and if our work is not just our job, if it's just all of the tasks that we have to do per day, I think it's a pretty rosy outlook. I think that there's just a lot of negative when it comes to like our actual careers, right? I think that's where like a lot of the negativity comes from. But I'm very interested in like the day where, the only thing that I need to worry about is just showing up and doing surgery. Like I don't have to worry about any of the paperwork. I don't have to worry about like cleaning my desk when I get to my office. Just like robots are doing that for me. I think that's going to be a pretty enviable future. Do you see that happening relatively soon, or are we a ways away from that?
So there's the whole adoption curve. There are early adopters and kind of pioneers with all of these technologies. They also start out not being very good. We have to always remember, we carry our iPhones around and we're very casual about the fact that they have more brain power than the entire ENIAC computer had at the University of Pennsylvania. But the original cell phones weighed 10 pounds. Mm-hmm. And it's all happened so quickly. I can go into a room and ask people, did any of you carry something that was called a Motorola bag phone? And like a lot of hands go up. Mm-hmm. So when the early adopters are the people who are sort of willing to tolerate the glitchiness and the badness. I think we're seeing it with ChatGPT, which we should definitely talk about, large language models. They hallucinate and they break down after 4 or 5 queries, but they're definitely a signal, where that's going. Is it about as different as the 10-pound Motorola phone to the iPhone? We have to be able to imagine how much better it's going to get. Mm-hmm. And then the middle part of that bell curve of adoption. I'm not an early adopter. I'm a fast follower. I want you to try it first, Dr. Imran. And then after all the really annoying glitches are out of it, then I'll come along. Mm-hmm. And my husband will never get there. He's lagging. He's like at the end of the bell curve. Yeah. So all of this stuff. And well, the other thing we look at collapse scenarios for industries, and there's something called residual assets at the end. If you think about digital photography versus film, that was a pretty rapid transition, and it cost Kodak, its primary business. Yeah. But there are still film people, some of my daughter's friends will only shoot film. They think it's better. There's a small group of people who still play phonograph records too. Mm-hmm. They like the sound quality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, side topic, do you like when a new software comes out, you said you're a fast follower. Like, can you give me an example of like when you got into something maybe a little bit earlier than your husband and you got a lot of profound benefit from it, but he didn't get that same benefit? Like it was much more difficult experience for him.
So I'll quote Kevin Kelly here because he's one of my favorite writers and he got me started on this road. He basically says, imagine how much harder it is if you don't keep upgrading your phone. Mm-hmm. If you miss one upgrade, it's not so bad. But if you miss 10 upgrades, all of a sudden it's a completely different machine and you're really lost. Mm-hmm. So I was badgering my husband this week and saying, you got to get off the button. You got to move to the swipe. You can't be one of the people that never got off the button train because, that train's not going anywhere. Yeah. And if you look at and Kelly says, which is really comforting to me, we're all newbies. We will always be adapting to new technology. We will never get it to the point where we're comfortable and we're finished and, phew, I can settle in here because it's going to keep changing on us. So we have to just get used to being newbies all the time.
That's kind of the norm, right? I mean, even for careers, you have to learn and relearn and relearn. And if you're not up to speed, certainly in my field, like you're going to be left behind. I think that gives people a lot of worry about technology, that they're worried that they might not be able to keep up. What would you say to those people, especially when it comes to working? Is it more of just like listen, you just buckle up, buttercup, you better just like get it done? Or is it more like, what, you can be the type of person that only listens to phonograph records. There's going to be a space for you.
I think the listening to phonograph crowd is going to be a personal choice.
Yeah.
I don't think it's going to be a choice we can make it work. Mm-hmm. So I'm definitely a buckle up buttercup person in my messaging. When in my organizational change work, sometimes people come in and complain that they're, having to adapt to a new computer system. And I say, well, get really good at that, because this is just not the last time you're going to have to go through one of these. Mm-hmm. One of many times you'll go through this. Mm-hmm. And it really does pay to become better and better at change, both personal change, because careers are not as static as they were, when it was IBM white shirt, stay at one company your whole life.
Yeah.
There's a lot of encouragement now to retool and rethink and reskill yourself. I think it's it's an important pressure right now, given the pace of change.
That's kind of what I wanted to talk to you about also, is that I know that you've kind of made a name for yourself in instituting organizational change, but I wonder, just because of the amount of change that's happening on a more rapid basis, are most people becoming more adept at the pace of change, or is it still that normal bell curve? What I mean by that is that is the bell curve shifting to the left just because people have to evolve these days? Or is it, the same as it always was? You're always going to have people that are just kind of left behind. And the reason why I ask that is because if you're teaching organizational change, I'm sure that you've had to institute a lot of organizational change. And so you probably see that firsthand. This is something that like maybe a company might have directed, but to the layperson, it's the same as if society directed that to them, right? Like if the company tells you, hey, listen, you need to get on electronic medical records, right?
Right.
Something that you have to do. Whether it's coming from the company or whether it's coming from society, it's the same experience for the person at the bottom, right? So do you feel like more people at the bottom are becoming more adept at change, or is it still like that same bell curve that it always ever was?
I think people are becoming more adept. The other thing I want to address is I actually don't think it's about age, because often people say, oh, well, my older workforce, or, we have all these aging boomers, they're just not going to be able to keep up. And one of my favorite clients said, no, have a surgeon who still doesn't want to type his own emails, but boy, did he learn how to do everything new in the OR because it made his life easier. Mm-hmm. And that, I think, is probably the dividing line, Dr. Mm-hmm. Like, when I tell people the potential of this technology is to take the drudgery work away from you, they get pretty excited. Mm-hmm. There's still a lot of drudgery left, especially in banking. And the idea of automating that and having that taken away so that you can do things that are more interesting. I think I say it's like AI is like a Pac-Man. Imagine a Super Mario Brothers Pac-Man, and it's going to eat your job from the bottom up. Mm-hmm. And you're going to be so happy. The bottom parts of your job are not the parts that you enjoy, and they're not the parts that you want to do. And the EMR is an exception to that because that was misery. But that's going to get better now with scribing and voice to text and stuff. So
yeah. No, I hope so. No, the reason why I say that is because respectfully, I've had a very different experience. Like a lot of the, and not to be ageist or whatever, but a lot of the people before internet or before even mass adoption of computers have a much more difficult time with keeping up the pace of change. And I think that realistically, that's just because of the amount of change that they were experienced with, as opposed to the amount of change that is happening right now. It's very easy for me to teach a young kid how to use a new software to develop a new surgical technique to its fullest capacity versus me teaching that to, and that's coming from somebody who teaches surgeons, right? Like right. You have some of these people who are non-traditional, and I feel like they're still with, even though that there's a difference in age, if they're after the internet boom, like they're still just as moldable as somebody who is like coming out fresh out of school.
The digital native divide, just for fun, is considered to be 1996.
Okay.
So, but I think that's changed again, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, there are an awful lot of us that that went through that particular transition. I was alive before 1996. Even my daughters were alive between 1996. But now, when you look at 2-year-olds on planes with their iPads, it's amazing. You know, you said you have a 2-year-old, so you probably know 9-month-olds that can pick up their parents' phone and they know how to swipe already. And I'm like saying to my husband, get over here and watch the 2-year-old swipe. You know, it's not that hard. You can figure it out. So it does depend. We ran a signals group for regulators, and we teased the oldest member of it. We called him the Venerable because he was up there. And he was one of the most creative thinkers in the group. He was able to imagine all of this and the implications of all of this.
Yeah.
As well as, if not better than, the younger people in the group.
I think once we get the user interface such that it can be voice to text, or at least some sort of interaction with maybe not a human being, but maybe an artificial intelligence that can guide a person like that. Because I think conversation has been the way that we've learned throughout history, right? Like before there was written word, there was conversation. And so I think that's something that's going to be really interesting, is that once we have the ability to converse with computers the way that you and I are conversing, I think that's going to be something that's interesting, especially for the older population, you know?
Yes.
How do you feel about that?
Well, I was just thinking, I have friends, he just turned 80 and she's much younger, but they have their entire interface with technology is voice. They said, we would never be able to figure this out. We can't say, like, you know, Google turn on the Super Bowl. It works for them. And like Siri, you know, GPS me to the grocery store. If they can't imagine doing all the buttons. So I do think that makes it more accessible. I think we are at the point now, thanks to the large language models, of being able to have conversations. And you're almost talking about what I've been hearing about, which is intelligent agents. So all of us will have this.
Yeah, I can't wait.
Companion AI, which may or may not have a physical robotic form, but often might. And they'll just travel around with us in augmented reality. The digital world and the physical world will blend. Early signal Pokemon Go, right? I can see the little Pokemon, but I can still see the sidewalk. That's come a long way since Pokemon Go. There's a lot going on in that space.
Yeah.
But it's not for everyone yet. Like, sooner or later it will be. I'd say 10 years from now, absolutely it will be.
Do you agree with Jamie Dimon? You think we're going to be at like a 3-day work week?
You know, this is where futurists don't tell the future. They just help people imagine a variety of futures. I think we should be definitely speculating about a 3-day work week. But I remember and have read about, you know, the predictions that we would have a paperless office when computers came along. I don't know about your office, but my office got plenty of paper. So, and so do many offices. So I think jobs will be transformed more than they will be eliminated.
Yeah.
You know, a year ago, if we were talking, you would have said, what is a prompt engineer? Now there are job ads for prompt engineers. Help me talk to ChatGPT and Bard more effectively and leverage their power. I can hire a person to do that now. And you can go to school for that.
Do you think culturally the concept of work is going to be different depending on what country you're in? Like, we might be trending toward a 3-day work week. Europe might be trending towards a 3-day work week, but I mean,
they already are anyway.
Yeah, but like is Africa going to do that? Is China going to do that? I don't know. Like, is that something that you've noticed? It's because I know you lecture in lots of different places. Do you feel like it's different depending on whatever country you're in?
I think I would draw a distinction between developed countries and less developed countries in terms of, but you know, it's also the case that some of the really interesting innovations are starting in places like Africa. Classic Clayton Christensen, you know, where does the disruption start? It starts away from the legacy systems. So you got a company like Zipline which started in Rwanda, delivering blood to rural areas with drones, right? Because they didn't have the infrastructure of roads. And there's an amazing video about that I could send you. And now they're coming into the US market, and they're not going to be delivering blood with their drones, but they are starting to work with healthcare systems to deliver supplies from one location to another.
Yeah, no, I was literally in that situation a few months ago where we had to get one instrument from one hospital to another, and they're using couriers, and I was like, it took us like 3 hours to get this instrument. Whereas I feel like if I were to just literally get into an Uber, walk over there, pick it up, and then come back, it would have been like 20 minutes.
The drone would be even faster.
Exactly.
And that's coming very quickly. I think it's, we're getting real proof of concept with some of the big health systems on that. But it's such a good idea. And it's going to be so much more efficient that it'll, the uptake will be like that.
I know you work in banking a little bit also. What's your thoughts on cryptocurrency and that position in the market?
So the people that I talk to that I consider to be really expert in this space are not so high on cryptocurrency. It's kind of like trading in tulips, in Holland. It was hot. But they're very big on blockchain. So the underlying technology and the idea of a distributed ledger, what can you do with that? That's a mind-blowing technology that we're still trying to figure out what are the implications for that. And there's some really interesting weird signals. There's a county in Wyoming that uses blockchain to register deeds. It can't be changed. It's a permanent record. Very interesting potential to move alongside the institutional banking system. But, fintech was supposed to challenge the banks. And now what's evolved instead is fintechs and banks are partnering. So I'm cautiously optimistic that there won't be a system based on blockchain that eliminates the U.S. financial institutions.
Yeah, I think,
but it'll be.
I agree with you. And in fact, like it's a litmus test that I use to see if somebody's serious or not. If somebody's like super into blockchain, I'm like, I don't know, maybe I should second guess some of his other thoughts. I
was sitting in a room full of regulators, and one of the older regulators said, I don't understand crypto. And so I just asked the room, I had everybody on the staff there, how many people have crypto wallets? And about 12 people raised their hands, and they were all younger staff members. And I said, go ask them. And this is this really interesting inversion that's going on in companies. Like you get to be the leader because you have years of experience and you have judgment, based on that experience and hopefully some wisdom, but you are the least qualified person in the room to think about the new technology. So how do we partner you with your newest employees, the ones that just came out of college, and that can be very helpful to you in thinking these things through, which is why I get a lot of people in the room.
Yeah, no, I agree. How do you feel about, first off, coming back to the cryptocurrency thing, I think that it's really going to be helpful for when it comes to ownership of something. I think that like deeds, liens, car titles, like all that stuff, it's going to be really good to have just a really clear cut, uneditable ledger. I think that's going to be really interesting. But the concept of ownership is changing, right? Like that's one of the things that I wanted to talk with you also is that, there's this whole idea about, we'll own nothing and be happy going forward. How do you feel about that? Because, work and ownership are so closely related, right? Like, we work so hard to gain access to funds that allow us to own things. How do you feel about this whole idea of ownership changing?
So we developed a model, which I don't think is locked, called the long waves. And it's just a series of things that we want people to think through while they're thinking about the future and the technology that's coming. And one of the long waves has to do with access and sharing. And the example is the zip car, right? Do I need to own a car when I live in Manhattan? If I can just walk over down the block, get in a zip car, drive it to dinner, leave it, and come back. At one point, they were actually renting umbrellas like that in Japan, which I thought was taking the concept about as far as you could take it, but would be great for me because I never have an umbrella when I need one. And so I think that we are potentially going to see more of those kind of commons level things. It's kind of related in my mind to the way Wikipedia gets written.
Mm-hmm.
When they started Wikipedia, they hired PhDs to write the articles, and they ran out of money, and they ended up, they had like 1,000 articles. And so they said, well, let's just do something completely crazy. Let's just throw it open and kind of open source it and just let anybody write an article. Oh, that's the craziest thing I ever heard. And it turns out now to be the most cited source in the world.
Yeah.
And, drove Encyclopedia Britannica out of business.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting example of sort of the commons becoming the way that people get things done.
Yeah.
And it could apply to ownership. Airbnb is the closest thing we can come to for real estate. And I'm not giving my house up anytime soon, but I love that I can open a computer and look at renting a house anywhere in the world.
Yeah. Well, I think renting in general is like become much more accepted. People are not able to afford a home, and they're renting more later on in life. Like, honestly, I'm in a situation where I could afford a home, but I don't really want to. It's just not something that I really want to put my interest in. Like, I don't want to come home at the end of the day and have to fix the thermostat or anything like that. I like living in a building where I can just call maintenance and they can come up and do it, and that's relatively new. Like, everybody in like my parents' generation is telling me like that was the first thing that they told me when I came out of residency. Okay, now it's time to save up to buy a house. And so, I think it's a generational change with just ownership in general. But I think
Dr. Imran, there's a lot to be said. If you look at what creates intergenerational wealth, I'm not worried about you, you're a surgeon, but what creates intergenerational wealth in America is home ownership and small business.
Yep.
So if you look at financial inclusion issues, opening access to people to buy that first home or to get a loan to support a small business, there's a long way to go to improve that in this country. And technology is helping. There's some really exciting applications of algorithms and big data and technology to improve financial inclusion along those lines. So it's probably a good idea for you to rent. But if you were in a lower middle moderate income community, LMI community, and you didn't have access to the funds to buy, you'd be typical of a lot of Americans, and it wouldn't be good for your, long-term financial well-being.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I didn't know realistically, how easy it was for those people. You're saying that there's programs that are out there, but I would say the majority of people that I know that are in that situation, the, low to middle income situation, whether it's people that work for me or family members or whatever, I think that they look at it as, the world is stacked against them, that it's very difficult to move up. And that's why I think, even ideas like universal basic income become like really popular because they feel like the system is broken. And I don't think it is, but that's a very biased viewpoint, right? Like, I mean, I'm just looking at it from my own eyes, being in a relatively privileged position. So I did want to talk about some of the ideas of, the ideas that work is getting harder, the ideas that the system is broken. Like those are very pessimistic ideas. But then on the same token, like you have universal basic income, which is a very optimistic idea. I like to focus on the optimistic ideas that you might have access to, that for those young people or people who are in those situations, hey, listen, here's some ideas that are coming down the pipeline that you might be interested in that might be able to help you. So first off, how do you feel about universal basic income? And then second off, are there any other optimistic views of capitalism that might be a little bit more equitable for people that are in those situations?
Love that question. I think universal basic income is conceptually interesting, but politically fraught. So I think, if you say, what's the world going to look like in 10 years, Cassie, I'm not going to tell you that we're going to have universal basic income. I think it will be an idea with more appeal in 10 years as we've watched some of these jobs be overrun by automation. If Jamie's right and it's a 3-day work week and no one is making money the other 4 days of the week, the idea will have more traction in 10 years. But I think it's going to be a very tough idea to put forth. But in the meantime, there's lots of good news. So the companies that I'm aware of and that I got really excited about are people that are expanding credit worthiness. So if you think about it, the FICO score was created in 1989, just really ancient history now. And it's based on what it's based on. But that doesn't happen to include, there's a new version of it, but it doesn't happen to include, do you pay your rent on time? That's not included in the FICO score. So if you're someone who's renting, like you are, that's not, you're not going to get any credit for being someone who pays their rent on time. And there are lots of other things that also aren't included. So a company like Fairplay AI comes along and says, let's take a look at the implications of your credit models on protected classes like African Americans and Hispanics and women and Indian Americans, American Indians. And they can show you basically, like, it's kind of like a systemic redlining that's still going on, even though we're working really hard to do everything in a way that's fair. We built these models in 1989 and they're not working. So they have what they call a second look model. They take more data in than the FICO score takes in, and they can increase your mortgage portfolio by 10 to 20%, no additional risk. It was just like win-win all the way around. And there's another company called Prism Data that does the same thing for bank lending and small business loan lending. There's a lot of interest right now in this convergence of technology and financial inclusion. University of Delaware is starting a financial inclusion fintech incubator. Maryland is starting a venture capital fund to fund fintechs that are going to work in their LMI communities, because people are starting to get it. Like, we can use this technology to open the aperture of lending and make it available to more people, and not, no higher level of risk, no harm to the banks or the mortgage companies. I mean, at some point we'll hit a wall on that, but there's a lot of good to be done between now and that moment.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, especially, the number one bankruptcy in America is due to medical bankruptcies, right? And I was really doing a deep dive into just the patient experience for us. And a lot of the reason why people don't pursue surgery, even though they might need to, or even though they might want to, is because of the financial implications of it. And then, there's some companies out there, like, I don't know if you're familiar with like Care Credit or any of those types of companies, but it's basically like healthcare only lending. And they're just ridiculously difficult to get into, or they might have super high interest rates. So not everybody qualifies for them. So I hope that there's stuff that's coming down the pipeline that makes just access to healthcare more affordable. But me personally, I don't know enough about fintech to really weigh in on it. And it's nice to have somebody like you that has some insight into that. So we are getting to the end of our hour together, and I really appreciate this conversation. I did want to do what we do with all of my other guests, which is I have the same 3 questions or similar 3 questions that I ask just to gain some insight to, how they think. For me, the first question that I start out with is where you gain your inspiration from. As you can see by my background, science fiction is a big part of where I gain my inspiration from. Everybody's focuses a lot on dystopian science fiction, but utopian science fiction is really great. And for example, a lot of the things that we were talking about, Star Trek always comes to mind as my favorite utopian science fiction, just because it's a post-scarcity society. There's no financial transactions anymore. Our whole goal in life is just to maximize our own potential and in whatever we do, right? What do you gain inspiration from? And if it is science fiction, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
So I love science fiction. It's what I read to relax. So I'm not sure it counts as my inspiration. This is very nerdy, but I'm really excited when I find a signal. Maybe that's the connection between something that I might have been thinking about because of science fiction. But when I see something that's actually happening now, that's very rare, but that kind of is telling, that shows you where we're going, then I just get all excited. I jump online and I try to find a YouTube video about it, and I try to make sure that people hear about it. So that kind of research keeps me going. And it's evergreen because there's new stuff all the time, and that makes it really fun.
Mm-hmm. Nice. Any books of choice at all that you would recommend to me?
The one I love absolutely the most about AI right now and transformation is sitting on my desk, which is why I'm looking over here. And this is going to sound pretty bad. So it's not science fiction. This is Power Prediction, the Disruptive Economics of Artificial Intelligence. And it's by Agrawal and Gans and Goldfarb. They have a great HBR article that was drawn from the book.
Mm-hmm.
And they talk about the difference between AI being a point solution, which just solves one small problem in your life without touching any of the other processes around it, or an application solution, which changes a few things, or a total system overhaul, a system solution. Mm-hmm. And the system solutions are the ones that are really fascinating to try to think about and come up with. And they also do a deep dive into the transition from steam to electricity, which is very interesting if you're into the future.
Yeah.
Because the way that evolved between 1880 and 1920 is just a fascinating lesson in how things get adopted.
Nice. Tell me the second question. I'd like to know a little bit more about what you did in Palo Alto that you felt like really brought you into being a futurist, because I call myself that, but I don't know if like there's any sort of training or anything like that. It's just something that I feel like I think about a lot. But obviously you call yourself that also. So what did you do over there, and like what brought you to this path?
So I think there were really three things I took away from that experience, other than the fact that I was there with some fabulous people. Unbelievable. The head of innovation for the World Bank was in my cohort. So it was amazing to be with the people that were there. One was this idea of foresight, which we talked about, signals. The second one is this idea of working in scenarios. And I tell companies now, thanks to that experience, you can't really have one strategy. You kind of need a portfolio of strategies because we're not sure what's coming. So you want to imagine kind of multiple futures and prepare for them by identifying experiments that you can run. You know, what are some things I can do in order to learn? Super early example in my career was a health system I was working with where the CFO said, we're going to do telemedicine even though it doesn't get reimbursed because we're just paying our tuition because we want to learn about how that works. And that was years before COVID, but they were much better equipped when COVID hit to jump into that space. So those kind of modest experiments that teach you some things you think might be really worth knowing as the future.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay. Last question. You have kids, I have kids, and what would you hope that their work life looks like in 10 years? Like when your kids are in their 30s, or my kid is, I guess at 12, it would be a little early to put her to work, but maybe when she's in her 20s, I don't know. What do you hope that work looks like?
So we didn't talk about ChatGPT, so I'm going to work that into my answer.
Sure.
There's just a slew of new research just this year about ChatGPT and they're putting it down in different places. And what they're learning is that it's really beneficial to people who are lower skilled. And it doesn't do that much for people who are higher skilled.
Absolutely.
It improves the performance of people either who are new or coming up the learning curve, or their language isn't as good, or they're just not as highly skilled. It improves it by like 30%.
Wow.
And they did one of the studies is on lawyers, law students, the low performing law students versus high performers.
Wow.
So I think that it's going to have a very profound impact on the future of work. And that, remember when they introduced calculators in the classroom and there was this huge hue and cry, like kids won't learn how to do math anymore if we let them have the calculators in the classroom. It's that kind of tool. So I think that the lesson for us is don't send our kids to school to memorize anything. Think about the implications for medical education for a minute. It'll blow your mind.
Absolutely.
But teach them how to be lifelong learners, continuous learners, because that's the world that they're growing up into.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think that at our core, that's really what work is all about. It's just perfecting. It's one of my old attendings used to call it just polishing a stone, right? Like there's always a little bit more that you can polish. There's always a little bit more you can learn. There's always a little bit more that you can get better. And I feel like once we offload a lot of these more menial tasks to things like ChatGPT and also use it as an adjunct to improve our performance, just like you're talking about, I think it's going to be a really interesting world for them. But thank you so much, Cassie, for joining us. This was really interesting, really illuminating. We really appreciate having you here. For those of our regular listeners, thanks for coming again. As always, for those of our new listeners, please like and subscribe on the bottom. And everybody, all included, we will see you in the future. Have a great day, everybody.
Thanks so much, Dr. Austin.
We appreciate you taking part in today's episode. Take this chance to reimagine a better future by joining a community of futurists who strive for a remarkable world. Be a part of this growing network and contribute to making the world a more positive place. Visit thefuturistsociety.net and subscribe to the show so you don't miss a drop of hopeful futurism.